Hello and welcome to everybody here for our Security Ledger and Invincia Hangout, CISO Hangout, and we're here today speaking with Jonathan Trull, who is the CISO of Qualys, and until recently, CISO, Chief Information Security Officer for the state of Colorado. We're also joined by Anoop Ghosh, who is the CEO of Invincia. And we're going to be talking about the job of a CISO, a Chief Information Security Officer. There was an article recently in the New York Times that really said, CISO might be the toughest job in information technology, one of the toughest jobs in corporate America these days. We're reading headlines about breaches at Fortune 100 firms, J.P. Morgan Chase, Home Depot, Target, and often in that, in the sort of follow-up to those stories is a question or a conversation about what could be done differently, what could be done wrong, what mistakes were made. Often the CISO is either the point person for those conversations or the role that people turn to and say, we need to really strengthen this role, we need to make this a more powerful position in order to prevent incidents like this happening again. So I welcome all of our viewers, and I will be taking questions via the Q&A app, so we're just going to hang on for a second here, give more people a chance to join the conversation, and then we're going to start our conversation with Jonathan Trull of Qualys and Anoop Ghosh of Invincia. So stay tuned. We've got people coming online, and we're going to give them about a couple minutes to get going, and then we will start our conversation. And if you're joining just now, we're going to be getting going with our CISO Hangout with Jonathan Trull of Qualys in a couple seconds. We are giving viewers a chance to come online. I see the numbers are ticking up, so we're going to give it about another 30 seconds and then get going with our Hangout. We just want to make sure everybody has a chance to see it from the beginning. But I thank you all for joining. We'll be starting in just a second. Stay tuned. Use the Q&A feature on your Hangout. It's got the little voice box with Q&A in it. You can pose questions to us, and we will take those questions either during the conversation or at the end of our talk if you've got them. So we're talking with John Trull, former CISO of the state of Colorado, current CISO for the security firm Qualys. And if you've got questions for him, use that Q&A feature, and we will get to them. Okay? Okay. So let's get going. As I said at the start of our call, CISOs are in the news a lot this day. Nicole Perlroth at the New York Times had a story a couple weeks ago that talked about CISO being the toughest job in corporate America. I kind of put a blog post out and said, is CISO the toughest job in IT? And with us today, we've got somebody who can speak a lot to the challenges of being a Chief Information Security Officer in our modern, very complex threat environment, and that is Jonathan Trull, who is the CISO at Qualys, Inc., which is a security vulnerability testing firm, and is the former Chief Information Security Officer from the state of Colorado, or for the state of Colorado. Jonathan, welcome to the Security Ledger Invincia Hangout.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm excited to talk today and share hopefully some of my experience from long nights and long weekends and why I believe the job of CISO is both very difficult but at the same time extremely rewarding and challenging. So happy to be here and happy to be here with Anoop and to share some of the things I've learned over the past decade trying to do this job well.
And I should add, John is a total road warrior and, in fact, has just disembarked from a flight in Washington, D.C., and is joining us from lovely Reagan International Airport. So if you hear some ambient noise, I think we've got him in a good place, but if you hear some background noise, that's why. But thank you, John, for tuning in and being a soldier. Also with us, we have Anoop Ghosh, who is the CEO of Invincia. Anoop, welcome to the Hangout. We've spoken with you before here on Security Ledger. It's great to have you back.
Thank you, Paul. Thanks very much. And I'm really excited to have Jonathan as our inaugural CISO. So met Jonathan a couple of years ago when he was CISO of the state of Colorado. I think I can unequivocally say Jonathan was leading the pack in terms of state CISOs. Colorado has a tremendous program in security. Jonathan's been on the national stage presenting at the White House before lessons learned. And probably what makes him fairly unique is, he took the time to go through the SANS critical controls, which I know most of you who are joining us are very well aware of. And he didn't just say, hey, let's do them all, because he had limited budget, something I think we're all familiar with. And I thought the way that he approached how to do enterprise security with a constrained budget in in the public sector was pretty interesting. And I've been a big fan. He's now left the state of Colorado and is with Qualys, whom we're all familiar with. And in that role, I think he's got an amazing bird's eye view of enterprise security writ large. So we're really excited to have this series of conversations with CISOs. Jonathan kicks off the first. Every month we'll do another. And Paul, I think you're exactly the right person to moderate this, and really happy to kick this off.
Thanks for the vote of confidence. We'll see. John, I thought just to start off, could you just give us a short account of sort of your path to CISO? Because I would imagine when you started your IT career, Chief Information Security Officer was probably not a well-established kind of end post that you were working towards. It's a fairly new creation. So how did you get from where you started to where you are today?
Yeah, no, I think that's a great question, and when you talk to different CISOs, it's amazing the different routes that they took to get there. So I actually came out of the audit field, so really started my career doing financial audits, doing performance management style audits, what we know today as SAE 16 audits or engagements. And because of my technical background, it was just kind of a natural fit for me to focus really on a bunch of different things. It was actually a really great glimpse of an enterprise, right? So focus on overall risk reduction, doing IV&V or project assessments of major IT project builds, doing pen tests and vulnerability assessments on clients, different things like PCI engagements. And then slowly, as I worked through that, I think I just had a real need or kind of interest to go more into the operational side of things. I mean, from an auditor perspective, I was always kind of on the end telling people how to do things and always getting the response back, which I fully appreciated, which was, we don't have enough money, we don't have enough time to do all of these regulations and things that you want us to do. And so I said, well, it's time for me to eat some of my own dog food. And so from that, I transitioned into the CISO role and the security role. And I'll be honest with you, it's a very complementary kind of fit to that role, because you have both the technology background, but you kind of understand the larger risk implications that an organization has to deal with as well.
To that point, you mentioned the challenge of budget constraints. It's one that comes up quite a bit in conversations with CISOs. I know recently there was a survey out from Deloitte and Touche saying that 75% of CISOs felt like they lacked sufficient funding, and they actually listed that as their top barrier. Talk a little bit, when we read a statistic like that, what do they lack, what do CISOs lack funding for? And these were, I should say, these were state CISOs, so these were people who had the job that you used to have at State of Colorado. What are some of the budget constraints there?
Yeah, I mean, I can tell you, and it's the number that I gave out when I started the role. I had an operational budget of $6,000 to secure. Yeah. It's pretty funny, yeah, or sad. You know, made me wonder why I took the job originally.
How many users? How many state employees?
So 26,000 users. And probably another 10,000 to 15,000 network devices on top of the endpoints to protect with that amount.
You couldn't do that on 6K?
It was very difficult to come to find out. So like you said, I mean, I think the survey is right on. I think things are hopefully getting better in the state and local government space, at least maybe in the state government space. We've had a few good economic years, so I think the budgets have been a little bit better for states. But at the same time, you're very fiscally constrained, and I think not even just state governments. I think you talk to any enterprise. I mean, I'm in the same boat now. I always wish I had more resources and more money to do things that I would like to do. And I think one of the keys, and I mean, we can talk about this more later, but you know, the key is you don't control the budget, and you have to be very good at articulating the need for a budget. And oftentimes, you know, that's not a technical skill set. In fact, it's just the opposite. You know, where you actually have to distill the technology and the risk to a level where, in my case, you know, the people that made budget decisions were our political officials, right? So they were farmers by trade, they were accountants by trade. They were attorneys. They raised cattle, and so again, to get that budget, you know, you really have to have a really good strategy to go and convince people of the need, and then have a good case about how you're going to prove that you did a good job with that money, right? And those are all keys to securing more than $6,000.
So, Paul, just a comment here from working with a lot of CISOs, particularly in the private sector, which is where John is now. It's universal, right? Everyone always runs into a limited budget. Now, granted, $6,000, right, is a bit on the extreme side, but here's what at least I see in market is everyone's always got a constrained budget. They never have enough money to do everything they want to do. Although we now know JP Morgan Chase has a $250 million budget, so you'd think they could do some things. But more than money, believe it or not, what at least I've run into, and John, you can share your opinion as well, is they're largely people constrained. Now, I know people cost money, but it's not so much that, boy, if I just had more money, I could do more. You literally don't have the people you need to not only run a security program, but also to figure out what the right security strategy is and how to evaluate the right tools to implement that strategy, while at the same time responding to fires that crop up every day. So I actually see, while budget is always a constraint, it's people and time that tends to be the long pole in the tent in CISO shops. Jonathan, I'm curious as to your opinion.
Yeah, I mean, that's a very correct point. So I've come up with these, what I call axioms of cybersecurity. And one of those, for the longest time, I said you'll never have enough time to do what you need to do. And honestly, I've changed that more to more of a physics or mathematics, saying it's really more about energy. How much energy do you have? And there are many things that are pulling on the energy of you and your team. And a lot of times, as a CISO, you're enabling the business. I mean, you've got training requirements, you've got other responsibilities and duties outside of security, you and your team, and all of those are detracting the energy that you have to apply to the task at hand. So I would completely agree with you. I mean, I think it's a resource issue. I tend to say it's an energy time issue, it's both enough people to do the job and sufficiently trained and qualified people. I mean, I think probably most CISOs will tell you we're all fighting for the same group of really good people, and there's just not enough of them, from what I can tell.
Okay, so first of all, let me break in and remind our audience, because we got a whole bunch of people on the line. This is an interactive Hangout, and the way you can interact right now is using the Q&A feature, which is over kind of on the left-hand side of your Hangout window. You can click on that and pose questions to us if you've got them, things that John might have said, or Anoop or myself, that you want us to follow up on more. And again, feel free to avail yourself of that. We are here to answer your questions. And feel free to use it. So we're talking about the lack of skills or the skill gap. We're talking about how hard it is to find employees. John, what are the skills that you really need now? But I mean, you're CISO of a publicly traded company, which is Qualys. You were CISO at State of Colorado. What are the skills that are most in need for you on your IT team? And looking down the road, because we're on the cusp of this whole Internet of Things, what skill sets do you anticipate needing to hire for 2, 3, 5 years down the road?
That's a great question. So I'll start in my mind with what I think are the crown jewel employees, those that just have the perfect mix. And in my mind, that's someone who has somewhat of a grasp of the business. I mean, they just innately can understand the business that you're in and how risk, in this case we're primarily talking about risk, confidentiality, integrity, availability, how does that play into the broader scope? They should have solid technical skills, right? Networking. I'm a big fan of people should be able to get on a command line and to be able to actually either write Python code, do some regular expressions, to go outside of the standard tool set. I mean, they have to be able to think outside the box, so to speak, like our attackers do. And then at the same time, they have to have really good presentation skills. Again, and I'm talking about the cream of the crop in terms of talent in my mind. Those that can take some very technical issues and distill them and take them up to whether it's the CISO who they're advising, whether it's the CEO, the board of directors, the audit committee, and they can clearly articulate what the need is or what the risk is, or if there's an incident that we're dealing with, they have to be able to articulate the potential severity of that incident. It's one thing to say, oh, we had this type of malware get infected on this machine, and then a lot of people take the next step and say, well, we need to just shut down the network. It's like, right. Whoa, well, you don't understand the business. We can't do that. It would cost X million of dollars per hour of outage. So that would be kind of the crown jewels of the best. But I think all within that, I mean, I think what we're seeing, we need really good people that have a grasp of what I would consider malware, how it gets on systems, how to defeat it, because again and again, that's just the typical way that whether it's APT, nation state, cyber criminals, I don't care who it is, somehow it usually results in some type of malware getting on a system. Right. So you need that group of people that are very skilled in that. And then I would say risk and compliance, although I'm a very big fan of saying that compliance does not lead to security, but good security should lead to compliance. At the same time, you have to have people that are really well versed in those regulations just to keep you out of legal regulatory trouble as well. And then I would say application security folks. The more that we develop, applications are developing at speeds that we haven't seen before. I mean, whether you're using cloud-based services like Salesforce or somewhere else. In fact, now a lot of this is being done by business professionals, not even application developers. And so you need people that are really skilled in cross-site scripting, SQL injection, secure coding, how to get that trained and pushed down into an organization. In my mind, those are the groups that we're really looking for right now.
A little resume advice from John as well. That's a great list of qualities. John, we often hear about sort of the gap within organizations between IT and OT, between information technology and kind of operations people. Especially hearkening back to your time at State of Colorado, was that something that you encountered? And if so, for companies that might be online listening to you, is there a fix for that? Is there a way to sort of bridge that gap, given that these days, IT is not an island, nor are the operations folks, that there needs to be a lot of cooperation, information sharing, and working together.
Yeah, I can definitely tell you that we had significant barriers between our operations team and our IT security team, especially, right? So security, I'm speaking of the state of Colorado, was separate from the operations group. We still reported up to the CIO, and there's a huge amount of debate in the industry about who should the CISO report to, and I think some of this kind of plays into these dynamics. But I would say operations, I mean, my experience, there's always a strained relationship in many cases there. I think depending on the structure, operations always felt like they were already busy, already overworked, and then security was saying, this is broken, you have to patch this, we're doing a new secure configuration, you need to go back and push out new configurations for all of our Windows servers. So they always felt like they were consuming more work on, I guess, what they often thought was probably frivolous risk. I think they would always make the assumption that we were trying to do the best security ever, and there was no risk to support those decisions. So we had to work hard. I mean, I see it at Qualys as well. We have to work very hard to build strong relationships between operations and IT security. And I think the better the relationship, the more effective you'll do as an enterprise security program.
Is that the CISO's job?
I would definitely say that that's probably one of the most important jobs. So the way I see the CISO role is really building the bridges with your ops team, building the bridges with the business, right? Because the business can throw up a lot of obstacles, especially if you're trying to. The example we always ran into is we would build a good architecture at the beginning of a multi-million-dollar new application build. For some reason, it didn't get included within the project as it was being built. It fell through, and at the end, security would say, "Well, you can't move that into production now, right?" And so the business, whoever the business owner that was either getting revenue or getting some new information from that application would lose their mind, right? I mean, they would just go crazy. Yeah, so a lot of that is making sure you have the right touch points in all of your processes for security, and that you're building all of those bridges with the teams that make your job. I mean, that's really you have a really small role, and all the other teams you're so dependent on to make you successful.
Okay, we've got a question from Casey, who's one of the listeners. John, what's your stance on mobile security, and where does that fit in on your agenda? Is it a priority for you right now?
Yeah, that's a great question, and this is my personal opinion, so take it for what you want. Mobile security, both at the state of Colorado and currently at Qualys, are not on the tops of my radar. Let's put it that way. I mean, when you look at kind of the current risks, at least that we see, the data breach reports that we follow, the industry advisories, it's just not as high on the radar for me as other types of issues. Now, I would say that data loss broadly is a more a topic that we're trying to work on, and I think mobility is kind of played into that role, and also cloud adoption. But mobile devices particularly, I mean, that's not something that's real high on my radar at this point.
So data loss, you're saying, so in the sense that if somebody loses a smartphone that's got corporate email on it or other documents, then that's a data loss problem, and that's something I am concerned about. But mobile malware and that type of stuff, not as much a concern.
Yeah, not at this point. Yeah, in terms of actual compromise of the devices, I mean, most of the compromises that we've seen of our employees, whether it was at the state or wherever, were usually through some type of phishing attack. They just happened to get the email because they were using the mobile device to respond to the email, but it wasn't actually malware embedded on the device. So again, most of it went back for us. I mean, what we saw in our experience were really human kind of errors, not even human errors, just social engineering attacks against those devices, and a lot of lost devices, a lot.
John, you've talked a lot about the opportunities and advantages for doing security automation, taking tasks and activities that might be time-consuming and resource-intensive on the security side, and realizing savings, and also maybe getting a better, better protection, better coverage through, automated tools that do a lot of this for you. Could you talk about some of the initiatives that you've undertaken both at Colorado and at Qualys on that front?
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, I'm a huge fan of automation, and I think it goes back to what Anoop said and kind of what we talked about, where if your largest constraints are really around energy or staffing or time, one of the solutions is I would say to automate as much of what you can. And so we went about kind of revamping a lot of our processes, and I mean I'm thinking of just our incident response. I mean, and I won't mention specific vendors, but we integrated tools such that we could go from a potential compromise of a desktop to pulling an image of that machine, or in case where we used in Colorado Invincia, where it did the forensics for you, and it would push that immediately to our SOC staff. I hate to admit it, but before that, it was really about hopefully finding the machine somewhere, trying to get an IT help desk person or someone that's on site, because we were spread out geographically, to go retrieve the machine. And then by the time we brought it back and examined it, I mean, it could be days, and trying to get the person a replacement machine in between that was also. So that was just one example of where we were, automating our processes and workflows. Same thing with vulnerability management, compliance auditing. Again, instead of going in and manually doing scans and manually doing audits, our goal was to automate that process and to put it on a scheduled basis and continuous at this point. I mean, our networks allow us, due to the bandwidth they could support, to do continuous auditing, continuous configuration reviews, continuous vulnerability assessment. So all of that stuff, I mean, automate everything that we potentially could automate. And I would say at that point, I saw our security staff at a certain point becoming almost the consumers. I mean, almost the consumers of data and decision makers of data, which for some of our security team was very difficult. They were used to being the hands on the keyboard and standing up servers and maintaining servers and ensuring the SQL database that supports that security server is and they really like to do that. And not that that's not valuable, but when we're so constrained, I really wanted my staff trying to either bring things into better defensive posture or to ferret out these really advanced attacks and to stop them.
Right. Anoop, what are you seeing? Because as John mentioned, your product ends up being a kind of key part of some of these automated, advanced threat detection programs. What are you seeing, just looking across the Invincia customer base, to the about how customers are using automation, kind of getting away from this, needing a human to be sitting there and looking at the alerts scroll by to be able to figure out what's going on?
Yeah, and I think a theme that's emerging from this conversation is we're energy constrained. I love that measure versus people and time. We are energy constrained, and of course, the more people you have, the more energy you have as well. And so I think what's happened, if you look at the industry, is we've got a limited number of people. We all know that, and even of those people, there's a limited varying set of skills that can be applied to a particular security problem, whether it's malware forensics, incident response, alert monitoring, as you said. And so what we're seeing now is these constraints on energy are driving the way that security operations are running. To Jonathan's point earlier, there's this gap between the security team, which may be small, and the operations team, which may be larger, where you're basically having to beg, borrow, steal from the operations team to actually implement your security program.
Right.
And even worse, as a CISO, you have the responsibility, but not necessarily the resources to implement. And when you do, say, for instance, acquire some new technology, again, you're having to beg, borrow, steal some other group, and in that, all you're really doing is creating work for this other team, and they're going to say, no, thank you very much. I'm glad you bought something, but don't count on me to go ask my people to do more. That's one of the big challenges we see in the enterprise space. And so what we do, of course, is engage early with not only the security team, but also with the operations team, make sure everyone's equally vested in the outcome, and to make the business case to the operations team. This is why we're going to actually reduce your work factor, your energy expended around security incidents rather than grow it, right? Now, carrying that forward in the future, I think what you're going to see are the CISOs that lean forward, and I think we're talking to one here, are going to be looking for security solutions that don't drive a huge energy tail. I was going to say logistical or people tail, but a huge energy consumption around that product. I think the industry learned when you bought a SIM product, that was just the beginning of a huge amount of people would drive and energy expended into it. If you didn't buy the people that came with the tool, you just weren't going to get a lot of value of the tool.
Right.
To a large extent, that's still happening in the security space, and it's incumbent on those of us who are security technology providers to make sure that we're automating as much of the security process as possible, because it brings you two things. Number one, we've got the limited energy, as we've talked about, so we can't demand more from our customers with what they just don't have, which is people. The second is, if I can give John and his teams the right tools to automate security processes, then they don't have to go beg, borrow, and steal from the operations team. So for instance, today with Invincia running on each client, we stopped the compromise in the first place, so John doesn't have to go run out with an IR team and where we're just telling him about a problem that he's got to now go fix. Right? That's important.
Right.
And where we're going, I think where you're going to see the industry moving is towards automation, from prevention, detection, to remediation, all the way out to predictive analytics about what's going on, all driven by dashboard consoles. So you have automation work on your behalf. The incidents, paint them, you can go clean them up, and you can go learn from those and adjust your security staff accordingly. That becomes a virtuous circle of automation. That's where I think the industry is moving. Obviously, we like to think we're out in front of it, but I think anytime you start evaluating technologies, and John, I'm sure you can back me up on this, it's not just the cost of the solution, it's the value it brings to the table, and equally importantly, what sort of energy burden will it put on your team? What sort of additional cost burden in terms of storage and network will it put on the infrastructure? All of these go into the value proposition of a particular solution.
It's kind of like the cost to own, right? I mean, you have this sort of, you know what it costs to acquire, but what is the cost to own? And it's almost like a metric that isn't very well defined in the security space. So we have a question from Jonathan, who's one of our viewers, that I think is pretty germane to the conversation we're having right now. And it's kind of an in-the-weeds question. But John, what do you think about a network operations team taking on security monitoring? Are they capable? And that's a question from Paul Davis, who's one of our viewers.
So I will say that it's possible. It's possible. So I would say in Colorado, our network team actually had embedded within it our network security group from an operational standpoint. Now, IT, in our case, still maintained oversight in many cases. For example, we are in the change control process. So before firewall changes, before new devices were added to the network, our security architecture team had to review it, make sure it was appropriate, make sure it didn't add risk to our environment that we weren't expecting. And I guess there are different definitions of that. So I think it's possible, but outside of even our network team, we had kind of a unified, what we called a security operations center team that was staffed by analysts. So and they were really the overall consumers of all of that data that was coming in. But I think it's feasible. Honestly, I think any I tell people not to worry so much necessarily about the organization. The key is what organization works best for your culture, your corporation, that allows you to get your job done. Because I don't think there is one right answer oftentimes, especially cultures and organizations are so different. I mean, I can tell you the state of Colorado to a Silicon Valley-based technology company, very different.
Yes, and it's not just nicer furniture in the office. So let me break away for a second and just remind folks, if you join late, you can ask questions. There's a Q&A button that you should see there on the Hangout. If you click that, you can pose a question to us, and as you can see, we are taking those as they come in, and we'd love to hear from you. So if there's stuff you want to ask that you don't feel like has been answered or addressed, fire away. I'm going to take a question right now from Igor, who asked, John, how are you dealing with the continued proliferation of intellectual assets beyond the traditional enterprise, by which he means mobile, cloud, SaaS, beyond the traditional enterprise, and he's talking about mobile, cloud, SaaS, and hosted collaboration platforms.
Like Hangouts.
Yeah,
like
exactly.
Hangouts, yeah.
One of the other things that I learned, and this is more of a philosophical thing, I guess, or the way you approach security, is that people are going to consume that technology if there's a need for it, if there's enough momentum. Whether security says yes or no or writes a policy, it's been my experience that people are going to consume it. In fact, your executives are usually going to be some of the top consumers of whether it's BYOD or a cloud type solution, just because it does the job better, quicker. So that overall, I mean, I think I had to learn, instead of being kind of the bad cop and say, no, we're not going to consume this, to taking the stance of saying, how do we do this correctly? And I think, honestly, one of the key things you have to do is you have to classify your data. I mean, this goes back to Security 101, but you have to be very, as security people, we tend to be fairly paranoid about things, and so we tend to overclassify at times data, right? Everything's, top has to be, none of our data can leave our premises kind of situation. And so I think you have to classify, really know what's gonna ruin your business, your company, really make you lose your job, and then you put the appropriate controls around that, whether it's encryption, which I think premise-based encryption is a great way to secure the data. But there are certain types of data that you just don't want out of your boundaries, and I think there are others that you have to be more open to it and just design controls appropriately. In Colorado, we were, and I'll tell you, it wasn't my call. I mean, that's the other thing. I've learned, a lot of times as a CISO, it's not your call about what technology is adopted. You might have input, but in the state we went Google Apps for Government for 26,000 users, and we had to move very quickly to go from, no, we don't want to do this, to then actually establishing all the appropriate security policies, procedures, workflows. Did we need new technology? What kind of data were we going to allow people to transmit within Google or store within Google Drive? I would just say you have to be very proactive with the business, and there's some data, but it's probably very rare for most organizations that you don't want outside. And that's the stuff that'll ruin your business. I think everything else, you just have to work with the business and your IT group and come up with some solutions, right, to enable them to do their job in a secure manner. And unfortunately, no matter what we do, data has a tendency to get out. I mean, I hate to say that, but I look, I mean, when I've studied cloud computing versus on-premise computing, I had equal number of issues with on-premise computing. So whether it was an IT person that decided to take a backup of a server home with them and leave their car unlocked, and it got stolen, and they didn't encrypt the hard drive. I mean, there are so many points of failure in there. So I haven't seen really huge differences other than legal compliance. But do your due diligence, right? You don't want to put your credit cards in a basement of someone's first cloud server down there.
Right. Right. And I think there's data that shows it's still, whether it's healthcare or other verticals, still one of the leading sources of data breaches is lost and stolen devices. It's not necessarily high tech. It's pretty low tech. People leaving stuff in cabs, leaving stuff, getting stuff stolen from them. Yeah. That contains that data. So yeah, absolutely. A question from Joel. At a high level, Joel wants to know, how do you go about building and maintaining an accurate risk assessment to support decisions that impact the business, budget, operations, especially with certain gaps in visibility? And those gaps in visibility, as we know, are a big problem. And we can look at the headlines for examples of companies that had critical assets that were obviously not part of their risk profile, risk assessment.
Yeah, if anyone can figure that out from a technology perspective, they're going to do well for themselves. Let me put it that way. I mean, one of the things that was always most stressing for me is what I call situational awareness. What was my situational awareness? And I think that really comes from kind of my military background, but it's the same. When you're fighting a large campaign across different countries with hundreds of thousands of people, how do you maintain I'm not thinking of myself as a commander, but kind of at the top level, how do you maintain situational awareness and make decisions? And that's very difficult. And I would say we strove to do that the best that we could through passive and active scanning, asset inventories, network access control type of technology, port security, things like that. All of that, in my mind, always comes back up to some central point. I'm not going to call it a SIM. You can use whatever you want, whether it's a SIM, a GRC, whether it's a Google spreadsheet that has macros built into it. It doesn't really matter. But however you can pull that data and correlate it and understand what's going on, that's key. And actually, one of the metrics that I always use is what are the percentage of all of my systems that I have under security, either visibility or control. And I know a lot of people will say, oh, it should be 100%, and unfortunately that's just not the case, right? I mean, especially as you grow globally, nationally, multinationally, as you acquire corporations, that task becomes very difficult. But that was a metric that I followed weekly, actually, using a bunch of different sources to pull together was, and again, I wanted to get as close to 100% as I could. I mean, that was definitely one of our goals. But we weren't always there. But we did pretty good. But I think that's a key metric that people have to use, because if you only have 60% visibility into your environment, then I would argue that you probably can't ever do a thorough risk assessment.
Right.
And the larger your enterprise grows, I would say equally so, the more difficult it is to do a very paper-based manual type of risk assessment. I mean, you can support those maybe once per year. If you kind of look at what the federal government's doing, they went from, doing this once a year, once every 3 year, 800-page, huge volume risk assessment with these plans of actions and milestones, right? And number one, the document was outdated the day you finished it. Usually it got put on a shelf and no one used it. So I think they've learned from that, and a lot of us have learned where we're trying to do this more automated, continuous risk assessment. So whether it's, again, what assets are under control, what's their security status, how far off are they from benchmarks in terms of configuration. I mean, those were all things that I consumed weekly, monthly. And then for a large enterprise, like at the state of Colorado, we would have quarterly what we called security operations meetings. And I would provide benchmarks and then the metrics supporting those, and we would bring in, I mean, it would be myself, the CIO, our COO, and then we'd bring each operational unit in, and we'd say, look, within your business group, you're off, you only have 80%, under visibility. What are you going to do about that?
Right.
But it was a constant struggle.
Right. It's like the known unknowns, right? So you're actually at a better position if you just know about the assets that you aren't able to actively manage than kind of sticking your head in the sand and saying, well, we know there's stuff out there that we don't see, but we're just going to pretend like it doesn't exist. So it's actually kind of an evolutionary step forward to say, yes, these are not under active management, and we know about them, and we're kind of striving to bring them under management, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I think, I always do an informal kind of strategic risk assessment in my mind, and again, that's just consuming all the data that's coming in and saying, last month we had 10 lost laptops. I'll be honest with you, if those laptops weren't encrypted, those all would have been data breaches, right? I mean, so many times, even the incidents and the metrics kind of led me to more of an informal. Again, it's not a perfect science. In fact, one of my mentors said, if someone ever asks you what your risk posture is, just tell them 7. And I said, well, why 7? And he's like, because no one really knows. It's like no one, as your enterprise grows, no one can really tell you. And what does 7 mean? It means one thing to you, it means something to someone else. So that's a tough problem that we still have to solve.
You're an advocate of using SANS critical controls and I don't know, OAuth SOC 10. I mean, there are many different lists of metrics that you can measure yourself by. Are there any in particular that you found really useful to kind of shape your assessment of risk for the assets that you do manage?
Yeah, I am a huge advocate of the SANS critical controls. In our strategy in Colorado, as we kind of shape that organization, is to implement the first 5 of those critical controls to a percentage of 98% or greater on any given month. I mean, that's how we knew when we had completed supposedly that point. And then obviously we track that metric overall to make sure what was going on. One metric that I always used about how good our malware protection was is number of machines per month that had to be re-imaged due to a compromise. And again, that usually came from our operations staff and some of our security staff, but I could kind of watch that gauge to say, if I'm getting a large percentage of my inventory is being affected by malware, then something's wrong. I've got a problem. Either my network security is not sufficient. I've got teleworkers who aren't connecting and they're not getting updates to their antivirus sufficiently. I also looked at some things around. I have to admit, we did an overall what we would call percentage compliance with our configuration policy. I'm a huge advocate for secure configurations. I think we can eliminate a lot of problems by having a really solid configuration for every type of device, so whether it's a server, desktop, laptop, and so we would audit those religiously. And again, for our metric, it had to be greater than 98% compliance for us to feel comfortable. But those were some of the overarching things that we used. I can tell you one measure that I don't like very well, but a lot of people use, is the percent of your budget spent on security. A lot of people like to have that as a measure.
Yeah.
Personally, I don't think you can, spend money terribly. I mean, you can choose the wrong things. I mean, you can make some very bad decisions. So I don't think that metric is too good. I mean, it helps kind of gauge you against your peers, but I don't think that should ever go into a risk score, in my opinion.
Anoop, I know you had a really interesting post just this week on some kind of common not logical fallacies, but errors of thinking that tend to persist in the security space. One of those was obviously that you can patch your way out of security. The other, that you can train users to be more secure. And you're a skeptic on both those issues. Talk to us.
Yeah. So I'd like to tie it back to the discussion we just had around visibility, right? So it's certainly really important for you to be able to assess your posture in security. And one of the ways, of course, is measuring your patch level. And certainly a lot of us are measured on that when you run an enterprise organization. And for compliance, you have to do it. But myth one was that you can patch your way to security. And what we have seen in practice is, while it's relatively straightforward to patch operating systems, it's extremely difficult to keep your applications patched and even plug in. So, the number one application that we see unpatched or plug in this case is Java. And the statistics bear it, right? So even if you look at Java 1.7, 42% of the enterprises out there running unpatched versions of Java 7. And the reality is there's a whole bunch of Java 1.6 and 1.5 out there. And it's not because these organizations have security leaders that don't understand their risk posture. it's simply that they understand in order to implement the business processes like payroll, timesheets, CRM, intranet applications, these applications were typically built on older versions of Java that are no longer current and also are not compatible with the current versions. And so they've had to live with unpatched software. So you see huge percentages of unpatched Java, unpatched IE, unpatched Adobe throughout the enterprise. And by the way, those are your top attack surfaces as well. The second myth was that you can train your users not to do stupid things. And of course, this goes towards a point of spear phishing, and I know, John, when I walked through your halls in Colorado, you had posters. And I remember this back from my days in the Department of Defense. We would have the posters around, loose lips sink ships, right? To remind people not to discuss classified information. In enterprise shops, you see posters that remind them what a phishing email looks like. Don't fall victim to it. And as we all know, this is National Cybersecurity Awareness Month. We're seeing a lot of programs around cybersecurity awareness. So of course, I'm fully supportive of those efforts and the folks that are behind those efforts. But we shouldn't delude ourselves into believing that we can train our users not to click on links, not to open attachments every time, because they will. In fact, in the post I showed Verizon that shows you pretty much will guarantee someone will click on a link or open an attachment when you get to 17 different users. So that's a really important point. And the third one, which is probably at least equally controversial, was this notion that threat sharing by signatures can be targeted attacks. And I won't go into it and read the post, but I wanted to sort of put these on the table for discussion in the post because we sort of hold these as unquestionable truths in security, and in practice, when you look at the ground truth, they don't match up. And we think once we accept you can't patch your way to security, you can't train users to go against their human instincts of trust, greed, fear, desire, and that recognizing that intel sharing is good, sharing signatures isn't going to be that effective when it comes to advanced threats. We'll be able to put in a program that actually accommodates for that. So that was sort of the point of saying, hey, let's work for the ground truth. Let's realize that we do have unpatched Java and IE in the enterprise. Let's adopt solutions that allow us to run those applications because we have to, without inheriting those attack surfaces.
Right, and it's so funny, I mean, you look at the, when you dig into these, APT-style attacks or sophisticated and persistent attacks against even sophisticated organizations, it's almost always one of those three issues that is the kind of in part of the root cause, right? So either it's employee got phished, or an unpatched application using some common software, like Java, got hacked, or it's a traditional malware variant that just wasn't able to be detected. Some new variant, but of a known malware family, even for these really sophisticated attacks. So Stuxnet's kind of one example of a bespoke cyber weapon, but that is certainly the exception, not the rule.
And to bring back to a comment that John made earlier, it was a good question around, hey, how do we handle SaaS-based threats? Because a lot of the world well, not SaaS-based threats, but SaaS-based enterprises. A lot of the world is moving to cloud, especially the small business side. I think John's answer was, well, we need to figure out how to get our hands around the most valuable data, but on the other hand, we need to be supportive, right? I don't get to make these decisions on what technology rolled out, but I do need to figure out how to secure these. And I think that's the right attitude. In security, all too often, we try to stop users from doing things we think are inherently risky. And at least at Invincia, we've approached this problem, and I know John takes the same approach, which is how do we actually support the IT enterprise within the business but learn to secure it, right? And so, the approach that we've taken with Java and other unpatched plugins, the approach we've taken with social media, personal email is employees are going to use the internet. They will use these applications, and it is inherently risky, but they're going to do it anyway, and they'll do it from home on a work machine, or they'll do it at work. And what you really need to do is give them the right tools for the job so that you're supporting them in their endeavors. They're using their browser to go to sites that are now compromised or malvertising, or just legitimate sites that have been compromised. But we need to give them the protective layers so they can do their job while not compromise the network. So I'd love, as we start talking about National Cybersecurity Awareness Month, that we stop saying no and really start towards a positive message is, yes, you can, but here's how we're going to do it, right? And we just need more security leaders like John spreading that message that we need to support the needs of the enterprise and IT, but we need to do it in a secure way. And there are ways of securing these things.
Right. So we're down to our last 5 minutes. There are a couple of questions. One more question anyway. John, one of our viewers, had a couple great, somewhat related questions, and I'd like to get those in, and then maybe John Trull give you an opportunity to have some closing comments. His question is: do you believe there's greater risk from an insider risk with privileged account administrators working remotely from the office? In other words, work from home. And his related question was to share your thoughts on mobility in general, specifically remote access points for traveling and work at home employees, soft certificate authentication, and so on. So 2 questions kind of relate around the same issue, which is, you have a more remote, more mobile workforce. They're connecting into your office from various locations, and how do you manage the risk associated with that?
Yeah, and those are great questions. In fact, I mean, that is one of the largest threats out there, I believe. In fact, U.S. CERT just put out a whole advisory on, I don't want to say the dangers of remote administration, but just the threat from people actually, the bad guys know this stuff as well as we do. In fact, they probably know it better, because they tend to, they're not constrained by corporate policy and ethics. They can kind of go out and attack how they want, but, they're frequently going after these remote administration types of services. I can tell you, for me, I think for the most part, we try to use technology to reduce the risk where we can. For any remote type of access, we require 2 forms of authentication. And I won't go into the products, but whether it's a certificate-based plus a password, whether it's an actual dongle or a key, hardware-based, or whether it's the SMS codes that can be texted to you, our goal, and we've seen a big reduction in the risk and the types of infections by requiring that 2-factor type of authentication. In some places, we have tried to look at, do you assessing the status of the device they're connecting with and making a decision about whether they can connect or not. I would say that one has proved trickier at times, because then you actually have to have a very good set of policies about what's allowed, what's not, and does that you get into HR issues, legal issues, policy and procedure kind of stuff. So those are the huge technology kind of pieces that we've tried to use to control the issue. And then account lockouts are big for us. I mean, honestly, still a lot of it is just happening through pure brute forcing and default passwords. I mean, I hate to say it. I wish those days were gone, but I think as Anoop said, one of my philosophies, and it's not just our user, it's actually our IT staff as well, you have to assume that they're going to make a mistake. I mean, part of designing a security program is I assume someone's going to put a server that they did not harden with the default password on the perimeter. My goal is to find it, identify it, and get it off or fixed before the bad guys do. But those are a few of the philosophies.
Now, just to add on very quickly to the question, address another part of the question is, this is a really big issue in mobile workforce. So much of today's professional workforce, like John's in an airport right now, is mobile. They're either working from home at a remote office or on the road. And oftentimes that endpoint presents a unique vulnerability in that case if they're not protected by the corporate security for instance, on a VPN, which is the remote access portion. We really see going forward in the future, the perimeter model of enterprise security will implode. At the end of the day, the security on the endpoint will largely dictate how well you protect your enterprise. So for us at Invincia, we find a huge business driver besides the Java, unplugged Java issue and spear phishing issue is the mobile workforce. Getting protection around the laptops in your enterprise so that when they leave the enterprise and they're not connected to the corporate network without the firewall and other protection in the SOC, you're still protected on the endpoint.
Great. Well, listen.
No, that's a great point.
Go ahead.
No, I was just saying that's a great point. I mean, at Qualys, one of the things that we say is the human is the new endpoint or the new perimeter. I mean, wherever they go and whatever devices they're consuming, which are usually more than one, and again, it's usually consuming your corporate resources, or they're moving corporate resources into their own personal cloud resources. But I agree, the idea of the old school perimeter is going to go away, and it's going to get here quicker than we would probably like or are prepared to handle.
Thank you so much. Hey guys, we're done with our hour. It's different time depending on where you are in the world. But I wanted to take a second and thank John Trull from Qualys, the CISO of Qualys, and Anoop from Invincia for an amazing hangout, great conversation. I also want to thank all of our viewers. We had a lot of them. We had amazing questions. I didn't get to answer quite all of them, but I thank you all for asking them, and we will make sure that we answer them offline. Also be aware that this is being recorded and that there will be a video version of it, a recorded version of it that you can share and watch offline when we're done. So we're gonna that'll be up within the next day or so, and you can share it and rewatch it if you want. We'll have another CISO Hangout coming up in a month in November. This is part of a series that Security Ledger is doing with Invincia, and we're going to bring top CISOs like John onto Google. We're going to hang out. We're going to take your questions. We're going to pick their brain for every morsel of information they have to share. And John Trull, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us today. It was such a thrill having you.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Great. And Anoop, thank you for joining us once again. Great thoughts, great input.
My pleasure. Thank you, Paul, for hosting, John for joining us, and for everyone that joined, thank you very much. Look forward to seeing you again on the Hangout next month with our next CISO speaker.
Great. Thanks, everybody, and stay tuned. We'll see you next month.
Okay. Bye-bye. Thank you.
Take care. Bye.